We're starting a new study this week. It'll be 4 weeks after finishing up a 10-week study on the prophets. It talked a lot about their role in Scripture, their role in their communities, and maybe more pointedly, how we might be inspired to act and impact a hurting world through the ways and actions of people who carry the title of Christ followers. This series is going to look very different than that one, but it seeks to kind of carry on that conversation, albeit it'll be in a different way. This series will look at 4 key turning points in the story of Christianity. To take a look at these moments, to look at the humans who deeply desired to follow the ways of Jesus at that time, like we do today. These were humans just like you and me. Sometimes, because it was a long time ago, we can deify these people, but they're just like we were. Good and bad, beauty and ugliness included. This will be, like I said, this will be a 4-week study on major changes that have occurred up to the present day, with focuses that occurred roughly every 500 years along the way. And we're audaciously attempting to cover 2,000 years of Christian history in this short time frame. So, or at least a few pieces of that. So this week, I am covering turning point number 1, talking about the early church from a missional movement to a religion of empire. So just to get right into it, obviously starting out of Jerusalem, we know the story through the New Testament, but this is roughly kind of the spread. I hope everybody can see it. It's got the Roman Empire is the kind of the beige, dark beige, and the spread that happened with the churches. These are sort of the church kind of hubs that sort of began to be created. Churches in there you'll see from, along with Corinth, Thessalonica, Philippi, familiar ones from the New Testament, and then some of the larger cities at the time that the Christians got into and formed communities, and it kept growing and expanding. And along with this class, I've kind of created a graph to kind of help us see firsthand kind of a rough. And I'll explain it as I'm talking through it, but kind of a seeing growth and what it looked like. So, 33 A.D., right as Jesus died. I took this based on estimates from a few different sources, but roughly there's about 1,000 Christians around that time. Obviously growing out of that, but and that would have in the Roman Empire. That would have been about 1 for every 125,000. People living at that time, that would have been 1 out of 125,000. 100 AD, it jumps up to about 8,000, which is about 1 in every 10,000. 150 AD jumps up to 40,000. So we are still in very, very small numbers. As it keeps expanding, 200 AD, you get to about 220,000. And then in 2025, it jumps up to about 1.17 million. And we'll keep going as we go through the class. But so there's incremental growth that happens, and at that point in 250 AD, it's about 2% of the population of the Roman Empire. Sorry. And so this is another map that was created that kind of shows, and I really want to focus more on the orange little areas. That's where there was significant church development that happened to the point where they were really impacting their communities. And that puts it in important Christian centers anywhere from 100 to 311 AD. So we obviously know a lot about the Christian persecution that happened at that time. That gets talked a lot about. You see that in a lot of media, movies, things like that. And the growth of Christianity was a unique challenge to the Roman Empire. Empire understands defiance in terms of arms, revolt, and open war against the state. This was never the path that the church trod. These were people who were often model citizens who provided true value to their communities. Christians weren't a threat to barge into the forum and overthrow the republic by force. Rather, from the Roman perspective, these Christians were a counterculture oddity, a group who denied the existence of gods Jupiter, Neptune, Mars, Apollo, Diana, gods who, in the eyes of a first century Roman or second century Roman, these are gods that clearly favored Rome, making it into a global superpower. Gods who couldn't, and more importantly, shouldn't be questioned. A group who would care for, a Christian group who would care for the community when disease and famine occurred. From the Roman perspective, these people were to be othered. They were alien people. To ignore or ostracize Christians when times were good or the empire wasn't being threatened was a given. But when trouble arose or a scapegoat was needed, or even an emperor just needed a show of loyalty, Christians were one of the easy targets. Look at any empire in history and you're going to see a similar story. So here's a few examples that I've uncovered or that I read about this week. And this is such a large topic that I'm just trying to keep on the surface, but there's so many different things I wanted to go deeper into, but we're going to kind of be scraping the surface a lot over this to get to everything we want to talk about. But in 64 AD, there was it's called the Great Fire of Rome that burned about 75% of the city to the ground. And Emperor Nero is in his reign, and he has to explain why 75% of Rome just burned. It can't be his fault, obviously. He would have had nothing to do with it. And there's this little small segment of the population that are the Christians, and he targets this group because of their alien status in the community, that they were different, and says, this is the reason Rome burned. And I don't know exactly, different people say different ways that he did that, but so he blames the city's Christians, who made up a minuscule percentage of the city's population. Depending on who's writing the story, it'll tell you a different number, but certainly over half of the population was grabbed and they were executed with lavish publicity. Obviously, lots of would have gotten away that were able to, but he used the Christians in Rome as the scapegoat for that. About 180 years later, after taking the throne, Emperor Decius commanded for a sacrificial loyalty oath to be taken to himself and to the gods. And for those who decided to obey and do what they were told, they were given documentation and safety. But without that certificate, you were actually supposed to go, and there was supposed to be a person in leadership that would see you make the sacrifice, would give you this document that said you did it, and then you were safe. But if you didn't have that document, you were considered treasonous and were imprisoned or killed. It's unknown how many Christians perished during this period, but among the large number, renowned church leaders Fabian, Origen, and the bishops of Rome, which that would have been considered the Pope these days, and the Bishop of Antioch all lost their life in 250 as a result of not pledging loyalty to the emperor and to the gods. And as we're getting a little closer, 300 AD, the jump that takes place despite all of that jumps up to 7.5 million around the Roman Empire. This effort, these Christians that were loving people in the midst of everything going on in Rome, it was having a significant impact. There was, as you can see, and I know some of you can't see over there, sorry, but the trajectory that was going from early is basically flat. It's growing a little bit, and then we see a sharp rise take place. And it's up to about 12% of the population at this point in 300 AD. Despite the persecution, there was a countercultural thing that was developing. There was steam that was growing. There was something different about these people that were impacting their communities and the empire. So in 303 to 304 AD, 4 edicts were handed down by a new emperor, Diocletian, leading to the greatest persecution of this era. Among the edicts, a public sacrificial loyalty oath was commanded. The Christian population, having more communal influence at this time, disobeyed in greater numbers, and many lost their lives again as a result. If you've got, 12% of the population who doesn't follow the creed of the emperor, he saw that as, this is a moment I need to, really put my fist down. And with the larger numbers, obviously, would have been larger numbers that they could punish as a result of it. And obviously, over this time, it's a big empire. There would have been obviously lots of things that broke out in these different church centers that aren't included. There was a lot. I think sometimes when we talk about the persecution, we think of it as these empire-wide efforts, and occasionally it was, like I mentioned. But lots of, if leadership over here in Spain or Spain wants to impact something, he can do something, or in wherever that might be. That was taking place all over the place along the way. So getting more to the point of this class, we're going to be talking about the new emperor Constantine. He was actually born in England, and he was a part, at this time, the Roman Empire was sort of split in fourths with different leadership in each one of those places. And Constantine he didn't want to just have a fourth, he wanted more than that. So he's on a war path, warring with the next area east. He's on a war path, he's trying to gain control of the western half of the Roman Empire. And allegedly what happens is he is preparing for a big battle with the neighboring group, and he allegedly has a vision of Christ instructing him to enter battle with Cairo on a banner. And here's what that would have looked something like. Cairo represented the first 2 letters of the word Christos in Greek, which translates to anointed one, a popular title for Jesus signifying him as the Messiah. According to the legend, Constantine follows the instructions and wins the battle despite having a significantly smaller army than his opposition. You also hear that they put this insignia on shields and rode into battle. At this time, Constantine, lots of people will have a lot of things to say about what Constantine was thinking, what he was doing. What I do know is that he was seeking power, and this vision he has of Cairo, of Christos, leading him into battle, I think, in my perspective, he's looking for any way to gain power. And if the Christian God is giving him power, which is what he believed, he was going to run with it, and he was going to take it as far as he could. Soon after, in 313, so going back, the last major persecution was about 303, 304. So soon after, in 313, after he wins that battle, Constantine and Licinius, who is the ruler of the eastern portion of the empire, he had taken over the other half of the eastern. So now you basically have two groups, two rulers who are over the empire. They joined together to issue the Edict of Milan, granting Christianity legal status and reprieve from persecution, allowing Christian worship in every part of the Roman Empire. So no longer is persecution allowed to happen. It is legal, and part of that is also they're looking to have power, hold power, and you've got some movement happening. They're going to want to be on board with what's happening there because they want to stay in power where they're at. So in 324 AD, this is following another battle where he actually takes over from Licinius, and now Constantine has the entire Roman Empire in his power. He calls Constantine, upon gaining control of the entire Roman Empire, called around 300 bishops from around the empire, these are the church leaders at that time, to convene for the First Council of Nicaea. And this was an effort by Constantine to establish formal beliefs in the church through an assembly representing all Christendom. So he had a desire to, there's thing happening, and clearly the God of this thing in his eyes is blessing his efforts. He's now taken over the entire empire under the banner of Cairo. Among the item number of, and this is one of those things that I would love if I were to teach a class that was 4 to 8 weeks just on this. I would have loved to go deep on the Council of Nicaea because it's such a fascinating thing. But we're just going to kind of get to the surface of it. But among the items that got addressed and determined, the council established the Nicene Creed, which a lot of us are probably familiar with, which has been amended over time, but it's largely what was created at this original council. I found this picture interesting. You've got Constantine in the middle with his crown and and he's surrounded by these church leaders, and I can't read Greek, so I'm assuming this is the Nicene Creed. Seems like that would be a logical guess. But yeah, so these church leaders who have been through so much in their lives have their halos around their head, which was a common Catholic artistic choice. And Constantine gets that same halo around his head, even though they've had very different paths to where they are. But, David likes to show old art, so I thought I'd do the same thing. Like I said, this is one of those challenges of such a broad class that this is such a big thing, and I wish I could dig deeper. But I just kind of want to reiterate. So 20 years after Rome has had people put to death for not making sacrifices to its gods and to the emperor, the same Rome convened its Christian leaders to organize and establish a platform from which to begin its spiritual overthrow of the largest empire of the day. That is so wild to me. In this 20-year period, that change where these people the emperor would have loved to have those people killed, and now they have a seat at the table with the emperor. And there's actually, I'll mention this since we've got time, but there's this image that I saw written up where he calls these 300 plus leaders into this room to debate and have these conversations and to kind of establish this agreed upon set of rules, which I'm sure was a challenge, or not rules, but a way that Christian life was going to take place. And he has them all in this room, and as this story goes, he has the doors sort of spring open. I almost see like when you're at a wedding and it opens for the bride. That's kind of how it was kind of conveyed. And he enters the room with his best robes on, and he's showing all the power he has, and sort of is like, I've done this gift for you. Respect me. I'm going to sit in the room and I'm going to watch what you guys decide. But remember that I'm dressed the best, and I've got the crown. But I love for you guys to figure that out. Yeah.
Okay, I have maybe a challenging question.
I hope I have an answer.
What do you think the likelihood is that there was this actual divine vision? Because it seems like a lot of good things for Christianity.
Yeah.
Well, some people have said that this is actually the worst event for Christianity that could have ever happened.
We can have that debate at the end. But yeah.
What do you think the likelihood that it was an actual legitimate vision from God or from Jesus?
Yeah, that was one of the, doing research on this, I mean, everybody has different perspectives. There's a lot of people who want to say, yes, this was Jesus stepping in, or God stepping into this event in human history and creating an opportunity, almost like I hate to say a Moses-like moment because I certainly wouldn't compare him to Moses, but I mean, the winners write the books and tell the stories. So, it's impossible to answer your question. I would certainly say it's possible. I'm open to that, but we can't know. So that would be my response. Completely gray and right in the middle. But yeah, it's a good question, and I would love to know if that vision occurred. I just know that it worked, and he obviously isn't going to complain when he's gaining power. He's going to run with what's working, whether it's. And I use the terms allegedly and things like that because we can't know. But yeah. So now we're up to 350 AD, and sorry to all of you over there once again, but you can see the graph moving up. So 350 AD, it jumps to about 10.2 million, so it kind of not plateaus, but doesn't quite grow. The growth kind of steadies a bit of Christians in 350 AD. This is all estimates. There's lots of people who have come up with these different numbers, and I kind of ran with averages and came to what it is. But we're about 12% of the Roman Empire at 7.5, and about 17% at 10.2 million claim Christian. So the mounting pressure against paganism with the growth of Christianity and the emperor claiming, at least, and that's a whole other conversation about was he Christian, was he not? He got baptized at the end of his life. Was that just kind of a last move that he made before death when he was ill? But you've got the emperor who is at least encouraging Christianity. But as paganism in the 4th century is being kind of put pressure against, it culminated in decrees from Emperor Theodosius, making Christianity the official religion of the empire in 381. So over the 4th century, Christianity transforms from a persecuted sect to the religion of the empire, in the process becoming completely intertwined with the imperial government. So 400 AD, and once again, that was 381. So in 40 AD, the number jumps up to about 29.5 million people claiming Christ, which is, I mean, just looking at that graph, it's the odds of this taking place is, astronomical.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Was the church recognized as the official religion or as an officially recognized?
In 381, it became the official religion. Yeah. But there was, at the same time, there was openness to other religions. There typically was in Rome, as long as it didn't impact and put pressure on the emperor. But yeah, and I mean, Christianity at that time is it's a complicated thing to say what it was, because it obviously would look very different than it does today. But yeah, it was the official religion at that time. So let's talk about what that means from our perspective. So, what is the difference in proclaiming yourself a Christian in Rome in 100 AD and 400 AD? What are the differences in that claim?
Death or life, get to live.
Yeah, yeah. What do you go deeper on that?
You were hiding, you were doing things in secret. You may have been really close to the people that you were hiding with.
Mm-hmm.
And then when it probably got a little more, I don't know about blasé, but I don't know if the beliefs were as strong.
Yeah. There was maybe less at stake in the claim for sure.
Well, in the early 100 AD, making that sort of decision, you're making it, there's going to be a large cost
Yeah.
to that decision, and you have to weigh that, that's just something you're going to you have to look forward to, which is, that's a big decision. Whereas, in 400 AD, when all of your friends are Christians and, they're in prominent places, it becomes almost a strategic decision,
Mm-hmm.
or at least it could be.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
There probably was a lot of genuine Christians at that time as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's difficult to tell them apart.
Yeah, for sure.
You're not part of a counterculture anymore.
Yeah.
You are now the culture.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot that goes along with that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I didn't mention this in here, but this is that's about 49% of the population was that 29.5 million. And you have some.
Yeah, I was just gonna say along with that, that among the really truly devout, they would see the ones that Harv was mentioning as using it for their own like political advancement.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Yeah. Yeah.
The early Roman emperors were famous sometimes for claiming to be the chief spiritual advisor to the people, but often they would ask other priests, not Christians, to be the spiritual advisor. It was very common for the Roman emperors to consult an assembly of priests. We think of religion today as being a contest, believe in our God, not that God. No, this God, not that God. But back then they got along fairly well. If you wanted a God to help you do this, then you'd go to this temple. If you wanted a God to help you do this, and if you were to visit someone's home, you might see a little shrine room with a dozen different idols there, and you might have to explain, yes, we have this one to help us with this, and that one to help us with that.
Yeah.
But the emperor would sometimes ask this group of priests, send me an emissary so I can talk to him and he can go back and talk to you and you guys can advise me.
Yeah.
Well, that emissary was the chief spiritual pontificator, or in Latin, I'm not pronouncing this correctly, Pontifex Maximus, the pontiff.
Right.
And quite often the emperor himself would be the pontiff. And it was Constantine who first appointed a Christian spiritual advisor, and that's thought to be the advent of what we call the Roman Catholic Pope. But if you read history books, high school, college, I've taught them, there's a section on world religions where it talks about Christianity. From Jesus, it jumps to, by the end of the 4th century, the Roman Catholic Church had come into dominance over much of Europe. But they never tell you how.
Right.
And essentially, that's how. Constantine was the first to appoint a Christian pontifex, and then, talking about a switch, it moved from Jerusalem to the heaven church moved to Rome. And that was probably the biggest shift in the history of the church.
And when in doing so, it's good either way, because if you have all these people you can talk to who are in tune with the gods, if they are in tune with the gods and things are happening that are good, you can say, okay, I've got good counsel. And if it goes the other way, then they're an easy scapegoat to say, well, they didn't know what was going on. And so yeah, and then once bringing in he's still the power source of the empire, and if he's getting Christian counsel and then the empire's not going well, which quickly from here, the decline starts actually it's kind of already happening at this phase, but yeah, to have that pressure to be the one who can kind of commune with or converse with divinity, that's a challenging role to have with the empire. Yeah, do you have something?
So at 300 AD, where there was 7.5 million, it seems to me that's a pretty large critical mass.
Absolutely.
And so what I'm wondering is, like, if Constantine, is it the fact that Christianity is pretty strong relative at that point causes Constantine to, like, adhere to it? So if he would have said, oh, I want to take this hypothetical religion, the Betas, at like, what, at 320 or when he did that, like, would it had as much success? Or is it the fact that there was something there in Christianity that lit the match, that you had to have a critical mass at that point? And that's kind of an interesting question.
It is, for sure.
Because, like, what's kind of the causal effect? Because if the causal effect, you could make the argument that it was Christ's message that, was the persuasive, that put it over the top, that kind of lined up all of these events.
Yeah, for sure.
As opposed to some random act of power.
Right.
So I think that's kind of one of the interesting things as
It
you
is.
go like through this class to be looking at.
Yeah, absolutely.
Clark,
Yes.
one of the things, just kind of going a little bit, we use the word cynical or skeptical, is that empires are powers. conquering the other groups, wanted power.
Mhm.
And so perhaps what he saw was this growing group of people who were not really cooperative, but they were very diverse, and there was probably a lot of infighting.
Yeah,
amongst them.
certainly.
And what he saw was a potential problem here, because these people had infighting, they had competition amongst themselves, there was no unity in them, and yet they all provided a bit of a thorn to the empire, and he saw a problem there.
Yeah.
And being a typical megalomaniac, he needed control
Yep.
of that. So what's the best way to control them? Well, persecuting hadn't worked.
Right.
They just kept growing. And so what he could do was pull all of their leaders together, get them in a room and say, hammer this out, get united, and then guess what? I get to control this small group.
Right.
Rather than these millions of diverse, going in different directions from his perspective, people that he could not control.
Yeah.
He could control a few leaders.
And there was certainly church leaders, and this is one thing David wanted me to get into, and I just had to kind of pick and choose. But when he calls people to come together, there's not a small number of church leaders that, rather than come in, they spread out. They went the other direction because they didn't want to get anywhere near it, not knowing if it's is this a trap? What is this? But I mean, at that time, there's this movement happening. This is, 320 would have been right about somewhere in here. He has a choice being the leader of this thing. There's this growing group. This is 12+% of the population, and not only that, but I think he firmly believed that, the Kai Road, that led him. Whatever this Christian God is, it's doing something for us, and I can either kind of embrace this thing, this growth, or I can either squash it or I can do something to embrace it, and
But yet at the same time remain in control of it.
yes, no question.
Very
Yeah,
nice.
yeah. The picture. Oh boy, there we go. Clearly he's right in the middle of things. He wants to. I'm gonna celebrate this thing happening, but I'm in the middle of the room. I've got the main chair, for sure. Yeah.
12% of the population.
It wouldn't go well if you tried, for sure. Yeah.
That's an insurmountable force. That would cause a civil war.
Yeah, and in 302, part of the reason that there was such a heavy crush on Christianity at that time was because there was enough of a critical mass that was happening that they were beginning to vocally say no. There was enough happening in this movement that there were individuals in this movement that stood up to the emperor, and I think that was part of why it was such a severe thing that happened at that time.
You asked what's different about choosing to be a Christian in 100 AD versus 400, and we like to think of ourselves as rational, but I think the way that we make a lot of our decisions has to do with our community and what they value and things like that. And I think, if you're a silver worker in Ephesus in 100 AD and you've got a part of the local guild and they all offer sacrifices to Caesar and they really value the traditional gods and they really care about their economic prosperity, and it's not easy to be the first one to do something different.
Yeah.
Whereas in 400, it's a different set of influences.
Right.
And Harv mentioned being a countercultural movement. I think what attracted people in 100 AD is the Christians were the people that were picking up the babies that had been left on the city's trash dump to die. And they were the ones that invited the slaves to have dinner every Sunday at the same table. And it's the people that wanted something different,
Yeah.
that were compelled, right? Whereas in 400, you could want status quo and start to feel comfortable. You don't have to want to be different at
Yeah.
that point.
Yeah. And obviously this time, this is another thing that happened kind of in this range. There was lots of different big diseases that swept through the empire, and Christians were instrumental in taking care of people who were hurting rather than shutting them off and rejecting those that had caught whatever was there. Is there a hand? Yes.
I think Paul addressed this actually when he said, for whatever reason people preach the gospel, at least they're hearing about Jesus. That might be the Davis translation, sorry. But that was the idea of, I mean, this is really, whether or not they believed, at least they heard, at least they knew that there was a Jesus and heard stories about him. And what they did with it afterwards, I mean, how can we really know? Or you go in thinking you're doing it for one reason, and then Jesus wins your heart and you're sold anyway.
Absolutely.
So I think there's a lot to be said for just spreading the gospel.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And yeah, I mean, in these times, if there's not something important in what you're doing, you're going to, maybe try it and then move on. But if there's something that's changing in you, if you see there's something to this, I mean, history has told us you're going to stick with that. And so here's another question. Any other comments there? Yeah.
Are you going to address what's happening in the rest of the world?
In the rest of the world? Oh, once again, that's one of those, I'm just trying to kind of skim the surface. I know that, and I mean, you've got a population, the king, there's a king in, now I'm having to go off the top of my head, a large group in East Africa. This area, the king has made it's a Christian empire there. Further to the east in India, there's a group that's developing, yeah, I mean, it's certainly happening in other places. I kind of centered on the Roman Empire because that was easier to find a lot of information and go. But yeah, there's things happening all over at this time, and communities that are sizable that were Christian at this time as well that had changed too. So absolutely.
On going from what he said, the rest of the world, we're in the U.S., we're still in that Judeo-Christian environment and things, but even the rest of the world now, I mean, when we lived in Thailand, to be a Christian, that was a 90% Buddhist country, and if you chose to be a Christian, you probably were going to lose your family. I mean, it was, again, going back to that 1% or whatever down there.
Yeah.
So, it's a different world.
Yeah.
In many places.
Certainly than claiming Christ here. Yeah.
We had a neighbor that moved recently to Dallas, but they were from India,
Mm-hmm.
and their family name is not an Indian name. Their family name is Matthew, not Matthews, but Matthew. And he told us that his family are of the opinion, as there are some Christians in India who believe this, that Matthew actually made it to far western India and converted people to Christianity, and he can trace his family all the way back almost 1,500 years to Christians in India. And so there was some kind of an outreach somewhere
Certainly,
over there. But
certainly.
It doesn't just date since modern era when we sent missionaries over there, but way back. So
Absolutely.
obviously some-
And he's got a name to prove it. So let's, yeah. Is there somebody else? Yes.
This is all.
Mm-hmm.
During that time too, they called them sects,
CT.
where a lot of them would gather together and be in their homes. They would not openly express themselves as far as their Christianity because they was not following the same rules that was given to them in the beginning. And even though they was going through this situation with Constantine, I'm thinking about Alexander coming and opposing against whatever he was doing. And the people was afraid of him and had to go into hiding
Yes.
to really express themselves.
Right. And you still see in the world today, a lot of the places where Christianity is really exploding is places where there's more pressure. There's something about that environment that people are living out the Jesus way of life in a powerful and compelling way. That, yeah, thank you for that. So let's talk about the Christian leadership, the ones that are called together. What are the challenges that they faced once they had a seat at the table?
Unity.
Mm-hmm.
Who's got the right way?
Yeah, and he commanded at the Council of Nicaea, we're leaving this room, and it was a couple of months they met together, but when we leave these doors, you 300, we're on the same page. We're not going in. It's a big page. It's a big page. And at that time, there was a big conversation about Jesus, God, differences, similarities. We are, and 300 different Christian leaders, they're going to have probably 290 different perspectives. But we're leaving here with a consolidated idea, and that's what we're running with.
If you look at the Nicene Creed, it's kind of, it's fairly generic
Mhm.
From that perspective. So they didn't step on everyone's toes.
Yeah, this is what they could come up with under the circumstances.
The Nicene Creed was also meant to address any number of differences. Like it was meant to, it's taking, and like each piece of it, like when you go through it, is like addressed at a particular, quote unquote heresy that it's trying to develop the Trinity. It's it's trying to develop that, yes, Jesus was God. Each part of it was addressed, I think, to coalesce.
Right.
And then the other thing I was thinking is, once as unity is a concern for a church leader, then that's a whole nother different set of considerations. Because because another way to say unity is a concern is saying, hey, we want to grow. And when you want to grow, then you have to think about, if we say this, does that produce growth? Or can we dial it back a little bit and be more inclusive?
Yeah.
And so, and sometimes that's good and sometimes it's not, but it's like a different set of considerations than someone worshiping in a house has. I think.
Yeah. That's great comment. Yeah, and once this is kind of another topic, but once you have a seat at this table, at the Empire's table, the Empire's still gonna do what they need to. Power is the game that you are now entering into, and
You have to manage that relationship.
you do. And when they go back to their communities, and the Empire is doing things that don't look very Christ-like, don't you have the ear of the Emperor? Aren't you? What's happening? Are in 381? We're a Christian group. The people who are transitioning over and becoming Christian now, that doesn't necessarily look like what Jesus called us to, what we've talked about for the past hundreds of years.
And so you're putting a gloss on the Empire that you have to do to manage your folks back home.
Yeah.
Or vice versa. You have to put a gloss to the Emperor on what the folks back home are.
Right.
But again, it boils down to the emperor has control.
Yeah, at this time.
Ultimate and total control. So it's easier for him to control a smaller number of people, whether, and let them pretend that they're united,
Yeah.
than it is to try to control all these groups all over his kingdom.
So let's kind of, knowing what we know post this period, how would you say that the church handled their continually increasing power over the coming centuries? Once maybe even the Pope has a lot more influence. And I know this is a question that is, we could take the next 3 class periods to have this conversation, but just little points of it.
Let's just say that God was able to use even this.
That's good. I like that.
I don't pretend to understand.
Yeah.
I don't pretend to say that my thoughts are the same as theirs. I wasn't there, so I can't.
Yeah.
But God was able to use an emperor. He was able to use all sorts of different people to grow his kingdom here. And I don't want to cut the conversation off.
Let's just end there. Just
Yeah.
kidding. I appreciate it.
When we're talking about politics, especially anti-monarchy, we have the phrase power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And I think that's a challenge here too. But I don't know the balance of it, because I think, I try to not ever say what God did, because I don't know what God does. But somehow or another, good things were done with Christians in power.
Yeah.
Christians have done good things with power. But you get a lot of it, and you see a lot of corruption too. And so I'm always afraid especially the church as an institution being too deeply embedded with power.
Yeah.
Because I know we want to do good things, and I think sometimes it does happen, but that corrupting influence is strong.
Mm-hmm.
You just can't get away from the fact that there's people.
There's people. It's the only problem we have is people. Yeah, and one of the interesting things is you see the transition from, and it wouldn't have looked exactly the same around this time period, but the persecution that came down on the church sort of transitions into a persecution on the people who are still the pagans. And especially in an empire that's failing, if we're Christian now and it's not going well, we got to find a new scapegoat, and
Let's have some crusades.
yeah.
Yeah, the Crusades, there's a lot of things done in the name of Christianity that didn't work very good.
Yep. In the name of power. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. There's a quote that I love that kind of talking about what you said. That said by Tony Campolo said, "Mixing religion and politics is like mixing ice cream and manure. It doesn't do much to the manure, but it sure does ruin the ice cream." All right. Well, any other comments? This is such a big conversation and topic that I just kind of wanted to, hopefully you all learn a little something and can get a little perspective on the early church. And David's going to take over next week, look at the next 500-year move, turning point. But I hope you all enjoyed this and learned a little something. So I'm going to pray real quick and then we'll get out of here. Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for this group that has come together to grow closer to you. Thank you for the history. Thank you for what you've done in this world, sometimes in spite of us. And the plan that you have, help us to find our part in that plan, to live that out in our communities and with the people around us, and display true Jesus-like actions. Thank you for everything you do for us. In your name I pray. Amen. All right. Thank you so much.